Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared, and today I'm talking with Cabria again with Will You Walk with Jesus? We wanted to talk about Armageddon because of what's going on right now with Iran. There's an interesting article that both of us came across where apparently there's a few U.S. military commanders that have talked to their troops about this being Armageddon. Um, for me, the interesting thing about it is not so much that they're officially instructing troops that it's Armageddon, but just that they have that on their mind. There's so many times on my channel I've talked about the fact that when it comes to signs and things happening in the world, if it puts that idea in your mind, if it makes you start thinking about the second coming, then it must be having an effect on you. The Lord may be working on you and preparing you and those around you for the second coming. So I'd like to know, Cabria, how have you experienced this whole thing uh, between Iran, the U.S., and Israel? How did this all unfold for you, and what have your perceptions been of this war?
I think in this war in particular, it's piqued my interest a little bit more than the previous couple years that we still have been watching attentively. Anything revolving Israel, we generally pay attention to. Um, but I think that this one in particular, because the US is more involved than in the previous years with Israel, I find that to be pointing more towards those biblical prophecies that we've seen when it involves the entirety of the world. If somebody in the UN gets involved, then everybody's essentially involved, and we didn't have that quite as the to the extent that we do right now with Israel. So I find that now the whole Middle East is still in commotion, which they have been for years and years and years. But now the whole rest of the world is also in commotion. So it really does feel like an all fronts war now. Um, so I don't know. I'm definitely paying more attention to this one than others.
Yeah, one of the unique features of this war is that Iran has struck multiple countries. I don't have a list in front of me right now, but I know that they've sent rockets to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, um, Turkey. Today, there was news that they were trying to hit a U.S. military installation in Turkey, in Cyprus as well. And I'm sure that
Yeah.
I'm missing a few other ones. So
Uh,
we haven't seen that before. And then I have X up right now. As we were getting ready to do this video, I was just checking the latest. And there's news from Sudan, and who knows how serious this is, but it says Muslim Brotherhood elements within the Sudanese armed forces are now threatening the US and the Gulf states with war. They say that they back the Islamic regime in Iran 100%, and that they also want Sudan to be an Islamist state, be an Islamist state governed by clerics. So it was already interesting before this point because after October 7th, it wasn't just limited to Israel, Hamas. Hezbollah got involved, as well as confrontations in the West Bank and throughout Israel, as well as military action from the militias in Iraq and Syria. And then uh, there was some involvement from Iran, and there were a couple direct attacks. Uh, Actually, well, there were two, and then after that, there was a third one, which became the 12-day war. So at that point, it was interesting because he had multiple fronts. Israel had noted that they were fighting a seven-front war, but now it's gone beyond that, including, I guess, and we'll see if they do anything or if they're capable of doing anything, the Sudanese armed forces.
yeah, I think it's hopefully it's a little alarming and eye-opening to everybody the extent that this is going, especially because of those hits on multiple embassies and things like that. It's not just Iranian soil and our soil, it's involving way more countries now. Um, I also find it really fascinating. The language has kind of shifted as well after these embassy strikes of the U.S. Um, Iran kind of shifted their language from back off to all right, enough's enough. Now you should be scared. Um, Specifically, who was it? Uh, It says Iranian Quds force warns that the enemy will no longer be safe anywhere, not even in their home. The enemy should know that their happy days are over and they will no longer be safe anywhere in the world, not even in their own homes. This came from the Times of Israel magazine, and it states that this is citing Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in general. So I think that this kind of language shift also should be an indicator of how intense this could get real fast.
Yeah. This is another thing that just popped up. Hezbollah Secretary General Naim Qassem held a speech earlier tonight amid the war in the region with Israel. Quote, "We will fight to the death and will not surrender," the leader proclaimed. So that's something that I've wondered about is Hezbollah going to, go all the way till the end? Are they going to try and preserve themselves? Within the last couple of days, there have been reports that the Lebanese army has started to take action against Hezbollah and to arrest members of Hezbollah because they don't want the consequences that would come from Israeli airstrikes on Lebanon itself. Because I remember in the past that Israel has threatened the government of Lebanon that if they don't take care of this situation, that they're going to be sent back to the Stone Age. Well, uh, so far, Hezbollah's involvement, it doesn't seem like it's been too substantial. They have launched rockets and drones, but nothing like really massive. But it looks like the latest is they are going to, quote unquote, fight to the death and will not surrender. And so I wonder what that's going to look like. So, do you feel like this is leading to Armageddon, that this is Armageddon? Of course, in general, we have the War of Gog and Magog, but then it seems that within that you have a battle of Armageddon in the north of Israel. And then beyond that, you have the siege of Jerusalem. But do you feel like we're in that process right now?
I think we are. I think we're at least at the start of Gog and Magog, and for several reasons. I think, firstly, anybody who is not fighting for God is fighting against God. And if you're fighting against God, especially in this Islamic terrorist organizations, they have nothing to lose, because if they die in a martyrdom way, they gain glory and all the things that they could ever want in this afterlife that they have conjured up. So to them, why not put everything on the line? Why not fight to the death? Why not give everything up? Because you're going to be rewarded for it in their heaven. So that's terrifying for one, right? Two, I think that this mirrors, well, I guess for lack of better words, what's missing from our prophecies for this not to be it. Like I don't see anything in scripture that would indicate something that we're lacking in this buildup right here. Like it's the perfect formula to become Gog and Magog and Armageddon. I can't find anything, at least in my studies, that is missing from this formula.
Yeah. I guess it depends on how literally you take things. Because it, like, for example, there's the idea of like the 200 million combatants. But in the last
Mm-hmm.
live stream that I did, Mindy with Temples of Jesus pointed out that a lot of the key countries that are involved in this, if you look at their populations, not necessarily of like
Mm-hmm.
combatants or the military, but just the population of these different countries, it adds up to a little over 200 million. So,
Yep.
people have their theories, but I'm on board with what you're saying. I think that this could be it. It may not look exactly like what we think. There might be parts that are very literal and obvious, but maybe not. Maybe it's, half and half obvious and half not. Um, so as far as like, yeah, as far as, which side you're on and either you're, on God's side or not, it looks like there's some stuff coming out of the military. Both you and I have stumbled across a article. Uh, this is from HuffPost. I guess they've changed their name. They used to be Huffington Post. I didn't know that they were even still around because I never see anything from them. But let me just share some highlights from this article. Military commander, actually, let me see if I can share my screen. Um, there is it. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Military commander tells troops bombing Iran is part of God's divine plan, quote unquote. For some US military commanders, the emerging war in Iran is part of a biblical plan to bring about the end of the world as we know it, according to complaints filed by over 100 service members. The Military Religious Freedom Foundation has received a litany of complaints about religious ideology sweeping into military orders since the US and Israel began bombing Iran, independent journalist John Larson first reported. Quote, we started getting calls in the wee hours of Saturday morning from people saying their commanders were just jubilant about this and trying to tell people, don't worry, it's all part of God's plan, said Mikey Weinstein, founder and president of MRFF. Later on, one of the complaints MRFF received over the weekend came from a non-commissioned officer. In case you aren't familiar with military speak, that's like a sergeant, a senior soldier, but not an officer, not a commissioned officer. Came from a non-commissioned officer, excuse me, currently stationed outside of Iran, but awaiting deployment at a moment's notice. That officer filed the complaint on behalf of himself and 15 other troops, all of whom are of different religious backgrounds. The non-commissioned officer, who is Christian, reported to MRFF that a commander, so this would be a commissioned officer, potentially a captain, lieutenant colonel, or something like that, that a commander told them to tell fellow troops that the war in Iran was, quote unquote, all part of God's divine plan. The commander allegedly cited the book of Revelation and the section specifically referring to Armageddon and the quote unquote imminent return of Jesus Christ. So, again, it's just interesting how people perceive this. I always talk about these other stories, like, for example, back in 2023, when there was a lot of Canadian wildfire smoke coming down into the United States and going across the Atlantic to Spain and Portugal, and how a lot of articles used words like apocalyptic and it looks like something from end times. Like, I feel like people recognize on some level what's going on, even if it's just like using words and phrases like that in passing, or whether it's something like this, where if you do have military commanders that feel like this is part of prophecy, it just feels like um, people are aware to one degree or another. But this is really interesting for this commander to say. Just a couple more highlights. According to the complaint first reported by Larson, the commander said President Donald Trump, quote, has been anointed by Jesus to light the signal fire in Iran to cause Armageddon and make his return to Earth, end quote. The commander had a big grin on his face when he said all of this, which made his message seem even more crazy, the complaint said. Commanders were in a hurry to get subordinates on board, according to the complaints received by MRFF. And I think that's the only um, instance that's cited is this one particular unit. At the beginning of the article, it says over 100 service members. And we had just read that this was a case of like 16 service members that were making a complaint. So I take this with a grain of salt a little bit, just because, Huffington Post, they're a liberal outlet. It doesn't mean that they can't be reporting actual things, and this may not be something that's widespread throughout the military, but it's just interesting, the prospect that there might be some military commanders that might be saying this kind of thing. And just from my experience in the military, I'm not sure that they would be like saying this very seriously. They may be saying it just as they're like briefing their troops, just like at the tail end of their briefing, they may be sharing personal beliefs rather than trying to get the troops to get on board, quote unquote, with their beliefs. I feel like it's something more along those lines. But what were your thoughts about this article?
Um, so I saw a very similar article in the AA magazine, but there's one line that wasn't in yours that's in mine that one of the military members stated that he encouraged us to be not afraid. And I found that that was an interesting line. But again, take it with a grain of salt for sure. This isn't scripture. This isn't coming over the pulpit, but it is interesting and it's very intriguing. Um, I don't know. I just always think back to the American Revolution, right? Those were not endowed men, and they were still entrusted with this great task. And so we can't just denounce the powers that be for lack of endowment in our leaders, right? So people can be influenced who are not a member of our church. People can be led by the Spirit who are not a member of our church. And I'm not saying they are, because we don't know what's happening just yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if somebody was being influenced to do these things. I think there's been a huge movement, I guess a reintegration or a returning back to Christ in the United States, especially, where many had lost their way or fallen away or stopped going to church or whatever. And it seems like our country as a whole is definitely split down the middle. But the side that is choosing Christ again seems to be flourishing and expanding and growing with more vigor and more excitement than ever. So to hear these kinds of words are not surprising to me, especially because we hear them at press conferences all the time coming out of the White House right now. To me, it feels like a biblical war. So I'm not the only one who believes in Christ and the end of times. So it wouldn't surprise me that somebody would say these things to their military, that they are over. I mean, I can't think, if you believe that this is a religious war and you're in the position of one of these commanders, what do you have to lose by saying, I think it's a religious war. If you think so too, let's fight the good fight, you know? That
Mhm.
helps you to know what you're up against, almost like a sense of boosting the morale, like gives a sense of importance to the battle. I don't know. I have lots of thoughts, but those are a few of them.
What are your thoughts on the final stages of the war leading up to the siege of Jerusalem? Do you view it as something very literal? Do you see it as like a massive army? Do you see it as like, do you have any out of the box ideas as to how this could happen?
Um, so I know that it has to be at least Armageddon itself. On Megiddo is this big, great battle, right? But everything that's happening right now leading up to it matches up with scripture, like I said earlier. I think that it talks about in like Zechariah and Revelations 11 and Zechariah 12 that Jerusalem will be like a burdensome stone for the world, which it is right now.
Mhm.
It's either a thorn in your side or an ally, but even the allies come with stipulations, and so it says that like the entire world or all nations will rise up for or against Israel, and we're seeing that. Um, I think that. Oops, sorry, I kicked my camera. It says that Jerusalem will be surrounded by armies, and it absolutely is, whether that's like border countries or whether that is a target from a nuclear weapon. They're surrounded completely by countries. And that comes from DNC 45, where it talks about Jerusalem being completely surrounded by armies. Um, and there's like severe siege conditions right before like the two prophets that we see, or the two witnesses or whatever in Revelations 11. But it says that this happens in that time frame. And so I think that even if we don't physically have every single nation surrounding it or on foot there are plenty of air weapons, there is sea weapons, there are like they could be hit from any which direction by any given country. And so to me it lines up perfectly.
Mhm. I've tried to play out the different scenarios. You know, if it's a very literal thing where there's actually boots on the ground,
Mhm.
actually laying siege to Jerusalem.
Could there be
I'm trying to
both?
figure out what was that?
Could there be both?
There could be. I don't know. But I'm trying to figure out like how that would happen. The only thing that I've come up with the current scenario is like I've said in other videos, you already have a lot of Palestinians, Muslims that are in Israel itself, whether it's in Gaza and the West Bank, or just throughout Israel, because you have Israeli Arabs. So you already have some that are there. Um, if that is how it happens, then I would imagine that there'd be some kind of like intifada or them joining a larger call for jihad, which, by the way, I have expos that say that there was a cleric, I think, in Iran that declared jihad. But either it's like something like that where the enemy is already there and they somehow find success against the Israeli police and the military. I've thought about Hezbollah. I don't know what their manpower is. I don't know if they could successfully come down into Israel in any meaningful way. I feel like Israel's defenses would have to be pretty degraded for them to launch a ground invasion into Israel. I don't think that they have like tanks or armor or artillery or anything like that. Um, so it's like, I don't know. It could be, maybe it is like a mix of things. Maybe it's just attacks within the country itself. Maybe there are incursions into Israel from the north. Maybe it's also just all these rocket and missile and drone attacks. I don't know. It does, excuse me, it does seem that there will be a moment where the Jews are literally having to escape through the divide in the Mount of Olives.
Yeah.
So I've wondered, is that because people are coming, like troops are coming into the city, or there's just like lots of violence because there's an intifada going on? Could it be because there's just a massive barrage of missiles coming in and it's like everyone needs to get out of the city. It is about to be destroyed. There's an incoming nuclear weapon or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I feel like there's so many possibilities. And I guess all we can do is just wait and see. Um, Things seem to be spiraling out of control because, like I just said, I didn't expect any sort of announcement from the Sudanese armed forces. Again, it's yet to be seen how serious they are about it or what they are able to even do. But what if this slowly becomes more and more chaotic and you get more and more players and then it becomes more and more of a conventional war? Because there's been all this talk about like Iran warned that if the United States and Israel struck, that this would not just be limited to Iran, that they would make it a regional war. And it seems like they're trying to make good on their promise. In fact, I do have one thing I want to show. Let me
Okay.
see if I can find it.
While you're looking
There-
that up, I had two thoughts. So the first thought is that in Ezekiel he describes this last great battle, in the only way he can because he doesn't know our technology, right? But he often talks about like falling stars from heaven and great fire from heaven as brimstone, and that it perfectly parallels a missile of some sort to me. How else would he have described that in that time? And then
Yeah.
secondly, you asked, you were like, I don't know how this will end. Maybe it'll go away, or maybe it'll get worse, or whatever. I want to know what it would take for it to fizzle out. Like, how could it possibly get to that from this point now? How would that be possible?
Yeah, that's hard to it's hard to picture. With Iran, I could see there being a successful uprising, a coup,
Sure.
a takeover, but would
But
that
then we still
lead
got
to
all of
everything else
these
fizzling
underbelly
out?
groups. But
Huh?
now we've got all these underbelly groups that are real angry.
Yeah. What would they do? I don't know. It's a good question. But let me share my screen again. Um, so I saw this post. This is from American Jewish Committee. Nearly 50%, this was posted 22 hours ago. Nearly 50% of the missiles and UAVs or drones fired by the Iranian regime have been aimed at the United Arab Emirates. So I'm trusting this post because this is a reputable source, American Jewish Committee, but I would not have guessed that. And they have this graphic here. So in the number one spot is United Arab Emirates, followed by Kuwait, and then Qatar, Bahrain, and then Israel comes in at fifth place. So if this is true, and they say that these estimates are based off data from the Institute for National Security Studies, if these numbers are true, it just goes to show that, well, one of two things. One, that they are trying to make this a regional war, and two, they are intent on striking U.S. military targets. But anyway, that that's what's been going on, and it's kind of stunning. So, and I feel like complex systems like this are hard to predict. I don't think anybody can predict what's going to happen. And sometimes you have events that just come out of nowhere. Things play out in a way that not even the best of them can guess. So,
I know that the Saudi prince is a non-NATO. Well, I guess Saudi Arabia in general is a non-NATO ally as of 2025, um, and he stated that where is it? Uh, oh, I just lost it. He essentially, where is it? Okay, here it is. Here it is. He stated to a CNN report that he called the attacks from Iran to their airspace cowardly, saying Iran knew that the Saudi airspace was not being used to attack Iran, and it attacked nonetheless. So it sounds like he's not very happy with it either.
yeah, probably not. So, as far as Saudi Arabia goes, Pakistan had warned Iran, letting them know that, or reminding them that they have some sort of like security agreement with Saudi Arabia. And Pakistan already is conducting military operations against Afghanistan because I guess there's some kind of border dispute. But I don't know. Again, I have a hard time seeing Pakistan like really getting into this, but maybe they will, and they're a nuclear power. Would they
Yes,
use their
provoked
nuclear
enough.
weapons? I
Anybody
doubt
would.
it, but maybe.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting. I feel like it's almost like I feel strategy behind the US and Israel, but it almost feels like there's no strategy behind Iran's attacks. It's just hit whatever you can, um, and poke the bear as much as possible without actually doing exponential damage, which is very interesting, because they're claiming to wanting to take lives, but they haven't been. They've only been strategically hitting places with very few people. So I find that really weird. Do you find that weird?
Yeah, I don't know much about what they're targeting, but all I know is that it seems to have been very ineffective.
Yeah.
There's
Well, like
up
all the
until,
embassies have been emptied prior and things like that. So it just seems like pointless almost to send them there because they know that there's been evacuation orders at all of the embassies, yet they still strike them.
yeah,
Is it just for the attention of it, I guess? Because there's not a ton of damage being done.
I don't know.
Isn't
Um,
that weird to you? I find that to be so bizarre.
I think there's things that I just don't understand because I don't have the expertise. I assume that they are somewhat acting rationally, but it's hard to like really follow as a layman. Um, what I do know is that their ability to launch missiles is being reduced. There's
Mhm.
estimates today that they're only going to be able to launch missiles for another few days, and then by that point, I guess all their missile launchers will be destroyed. So what happens then? Like it's just crazy. I've said this before on the channel, but growing up, Iran was always in the background. I was born in the 80s. Iran was always in the background. So was Iraq, and so was Syria. I forgot to mention Syria in
Mhm.
previous videos and live streams. I think that those were the three top threats. And I think they became the top threats sometime around the 70s and 80s. Before that, you had previous wars, which involved Egypt, I think Jordan, Lebanon, some of these other Muslim countries, but they have worked out agreements with Israel or they become allies of the United States, so they're no longer really a threat. And so it kind of became Iraq, Iran, and Syria. Iraq was taken care of first with the 2003 war, and then Syria was taken care of via the Arab Spring, which affected many countries across North Africa and the Middle East. And in the case of Syria, it led to a civil war, which went on for a long time. I can't remember how many years, something like 10 to 15 years. And just, I think a couple years ago, I don't know if it was in 2023 or 2024, but around that time, that's when one faction came out on top and it seems so far like they're willing to be players. They're not antagonistic toward the United States and Israel from what I've seen. And so now Syria doesn't seem to be a problem, and so now it's just Iran. So if these if these operations are successful against Iran and there is a regime change, then is it mission accomplished? And at that point, I have to wonder about that scripture that says, when they say peace and safety, then
Mm-hmm.
cometh sudden destruction. So if that's how it plays out, I've wondered what does the rest of their alliance do? Russia and China, North Korea, and other like-minded countries, because um, Russia attacked Ukraine because it felt like the West was making too much progress against their national interests, and they were trying to flip Ukraine to their side, and so they were willing to go to war to try and keep Ukraine or or keep certain parts of the country. So what would happen if now you have Iraq, Syria, and Iran gone? Are they going to be upset about that? Is somebody going to do something against Israel to try and settle the score and even the playing field? So maybe there will a lot of people think in those terms of like, well, it's not going to be Armageddon until you have Russian troops and Chinese troops, and it is going to be a big, very cinematic thing. Maybe that's true, and maybe that's how it'll happen. Maybe they'll find some way to justify military action against Israel or something like that.
Or
So
what if
I
they
don't
even
know.
just supply weapons of some sort?
Yeah. So um I just feel like there's so many possibilities. It's chaotic. Every day brings new developments and seemingly more belligerence to this conflict. And I don't know. Well, do you have any last thoughts before we finish this up?
I had a couple thoughts. So in Revelations, we see a bunch of signs in the heavens leading up to Gog and Magog and Armageddon itself. And a couple of those are the stars falling from the heavens, a great ball of light from the heavens crashing to the earth. We're supposed to have a comet coming up that's super visible on April 4th and 5th, the same days as conference,
Mhm.
which is also the day before April 6th, obviously, which is extra important. But then it also talks about how there's like a great lion that stirs up the conflict, and Israel's often referred to as a lion. And then it also states that there would be a great eagle that, after a time of peace, would come into this great battle as well. And that obviously, the United States is known for being an eagle. That's our national bird or animal or whatever. And so that always piques my interest. But something that we sort of touched on it before about how, like, the things that Ezekiel saw and then the cinematic nature of this Armageddon battle, I think that if anybody from biblical times saw any of our weapons of mass destruction today, that would be the most epic thing that they could possibly think of. And to them, that would be cinematic if they understood what cinematic was.
Mhm.
And so for us to say that these missiles and rockets that are constantly being launched, like, how is that not cinematic? I think that we always think of the Middle East and we're like, oh, they're just always at war with somebody. But we're told in the scriptures that those kingdoms would be. And then we're also told in the scriptures that everybody's eyes would be on this great battle. And the whole world is talking about this. It's not just some silly cat fight. Every nation is either for or against currently. And so I think that we have to put those. I'm not saying it is or isn't the Great War, but I am saying that it has a great possibility of becoming it because it fits into all of these categories. And so for people who are naysayers or often like shirk at signs and wonders because they've witnessed too many and now they're numb to them, I think we all need to pay a little bit more attention. I think we all need to pay a little bit more attention and accept signs instead of discredit them.
Mhm. I agree. And I'll just repeat what I've said before. The entire Arab Israeli conflict from 1948 until now, the entirety of it could possibly be Gog and Magog.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a big, gigantic war made up of many wars and many battles and operations and terrorist attacks. And and all this stuff. So um, maybe we just need a better attention span. Maybe we need more patience. Maybe we need to really see the big picture. The whole thing has been playing out potentially before our very eyes, and maybe this is the very end. So, uh, for all anybody knows, maybe within a couple days, a couple weeks, a few months, just one day we'll be caught up, because for my studies, it seems like we're going to be caught up with um, the righteous saints from past ages, those that are in the first resurrection. We're going to be caught up and be with Christ and literally come with him to the Jews. In Zechariah, it talks about all the saints coming with him to the Mount of Olives. I have another quote from Joseph Smith that talks about um, how you're going to have the two halves of Israel, the Jews, and then the church, that are going to join together in a council in Israel. And when you read the quote, it seems like he's talking about that same event, like when we come with Christ during the second coming to them. I don't know exactly how it's going to play out, but maybe just one of these days you're going to be. I don't know what it's going to look like to be quickened, if you're just going to be transported up into the sky or you start floating away. But we might be in for some exciting times pretty soon. Um, and then entering into an era, a 1,000-year period where there's peace. We don't have to think about these things anymore, which will be amazing. All right.
Until the next great battle, right?
Yeah, until the very last one at the end. And you have to wonder what that's going to look like, because
Ugh.
I can only imagine how technology is going to progress during the millennium.
Mm-hmm.
When you don't have different forces suppressing technology, or just people most likely becoming more educated. I'm sure
Yeah.
that science will advance greatly during the millennium. And so,
There's far less inhibiting you from that growth, so there certainly has to be that growth in the millennium.
yeah. So that final war of Gog and Magog, if you guys don't know, because there's always new people joining, and you can look this up in the scriptures, go to the Bible dictionary, check the Institute student manual, but there's the Gog and Magog before the second coming, and I think that's what we're seeing now. But then there's another one, another war by the same name at the end of the millennium, in that small window of time between the millennium and when the earth becomes celestialized, where there's a final battle. Uh, Michael, Adam is going to lead one army, and then you're going to have the forces of evil. I'm assuming it'll be both a spiritual, as it also sounds like it's actual war as well. So at that point, I guess there's going to be podcasts speculating about how that's going to play out and the timing of it. But anyway, that's not anytime soon. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up here. So everybody make sure to subscribe to Will You Walk with Jesus with Cabria White. On my channel, I'll put the link for her channel in the description box below. She's also under my featured channels. And then if you're watching this on her channel, make sure to subscribe to me. I'm all about the second coming, and I think me and Cabria think a lot alike. So if you like her content, I'm sure you'll like mine as well. But that's it for this one. We'll talk to you guys later.